We're going to look now at the skill of agenda setting. Very often when we work with people, we have a number of things that we have to cover or we have to talk about, and sometimes we forget to establish what they want to talk about from the start. Some practitioners have told me that they run through their kind of assessment or the things that they need to do, and then at the end they'll say, is there anything you want to talk about? And often people will say no. Some of you may already do a kind of agenda setting process. What I wanted to do now is look at how this is done within the motivation interviewing approach. So I've managed to collar Andrew in again to do some role play work with me and to kind of, to set the scene. Initially we're going to do this as a role play. So we're going to pretend to be a doctor and a patient. We'll do this both ways round. And I've written a list down of things that might be talked about at a kind of, an annual medical MOT. So I'm first going to take the role of doctor and Andrew will be the patient, and we'll run through agenda setting in the way that it's done in this approach, and then we'll swap over. So Andrew, welcome to your annual medical review. I have a list of things here for us to choose from to talk about in today's appointment. There's a few things I'd like us to talk about, but first can you choose one or two things you'd like to talk about?
Probably sleep and exercise, I think.
Okay, so you'd like to talk about sleep and exercise. I'd like to talk about your diet. So in this appointment we're going to talk about sleep, exercise and diet. Which one would you like to talk about first?
Let's go with sleep.
Okay, so now we're going to turn this around so you can hear this done a second time.
Hi Karen, welcome to your annual medical review. I have a list of things here for us to choose from to talk about in today's appointment. There's a few things I'd like us to talk about. First, can you choose one or two things you'd like to talk about?
Okay, I'd like to talk about my energy level and my skin.
Okay, so you'd like to talk about your energy level and your skin. I'd like to talk about your exercise. So in this appointment we're going to talk about your energy level, skin and exercise. Which one would you like to talk about first?
I'd like to talk about my skin first. Okay, now agenda setting is on page 16 in your booklets, and you might want to write some notes down on page 16, but on page 17 there's a page of circles, and after you've heard this second exercise I'm going to tell you how you can use these, but I'm going to use the ones that I've prepared now with Andrew. So we're going to pretend now that I'm actually his counsellor. So we'll just do this one way round so you don't have to hear this both ways. And I've got a ready filled in bubble map that I'm going to give him in this conversation. So imagine now I've set the scene, we've kind of done contracting, we've talked about confidentiality, and now I want to set an agenda with Andrew for today's counselling session. This is how it might sound. Okay Andrew, so we've gone through how all of this is going to work in our sessions together. I'm really interested in what you'd like to talk about. There are a couple of things I want us to focus on. There's a few things that I was sent on the referral before we met today. But before I go into those, I'd really like you to have a little look at this sheet here. And you'll see there's loads of different topics you can choose from. And I'd like you to choose one or two things maybe that you'd like to use these sessions for.
Okay. I'd like to choose benefits and drinking.
Okay, so you'd like to talk about benefits and drinking. Excellent. I'd like to also talk about your anger and kind of ways of managing your temper. So we've got benefits, drinking and anger. Which one of those would you like to start with? Which one would you like us to talk about first?
We can start with anger.
Anger, okay, excellent. So as you can see, when we're setting an agenda, what matters is that we need to check out what somebody wants to talk about before we mention what we'd like to talk about. and then summarise those together, and then ask the person which one to talk about first. Maybe some of you are doing this already, maybe this is something new. If I can just share with you, what I find really useful with this is it gives me that focus for the time that we're going to be spending together. And sometimes people will talk kind of at length about one area. This gives me the chance to say, actually we've talked about this now, but we have got these other things to talk about. So it enables me to be the guide, or to keep the focus in the session, to make the best use of time for clients and service users. Also, sometimes people are really nervous about what's okay and what's not to say, what's not okay to talk about, and I think this gives people choice. I usually fill in one of the bubbles to say other or your choice, so that people have options in this. So I think there's some good value in this. What I'd like you to do now is consider how relevant agenda setting is in your work. And maybe you could take time on page 17 to fill as many of those circles as you can with different topics that might be talked about in one of your dialogues. This is if you work with service users. It's also a really useful tool to use in supervision or in meetings with staff. So it's fill in as many circles as you can with as many different topics as you can think of that might come up in one of your dialogues. Always good to leave some blank, or to put your choice or free choice in one or two of them. And then maybe you could spend some time thinking about how relevant that is in your work. And as I say, you've got space on page 16 to write any reflections before you come back for the next session. Thanks very much.